Matthew and Claire Dawson were the perfect church-going couple, respected, admired, and trusted, until the Sunday morning when their baby was found dead in a sweltering car outside the very place they preached faith and family, unraveling a chilling secret no one in Fairgrove saw coming. The town of Fairgrove woke up that Sunday, with the usual quiet charm that made it feel like a safe haven from the troubles of the outside world. Neighbors waved across freshly cut lawns, children dressed in pressed clothes tugged at their parents' hands, and the church bells rang out in their familiar tune, calling the faithful to worship. The Dawsons blended seamlessly into this picture of small-town life. Matthew, in his neatly ironed shirt, carried himself with confidence, while Claire, in a modest summer dress, seemed every bit the devoted wife. Together they had carefully built an image of respectability, one reinforced by their regular attendance at church, their polite smiles, and their willingness to lend a hand at community events. Few people knew much about their private lives, but no one suspected there was anything unusual about them. That morning, the couple loaded into their silver SUV and drove toward St. Mark's Parish. Inside the car, in the back seat, their 6-month-old daughter, Emily, sat buckled securely in her car seat. She was a quiet child, easily soothed by the hum of the road and the movement of the vehicle. The drive was short, barely 10 minutes from their suburban home to the church parking lot. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting shifting shadows across the dashboard as the air outside grew warmer. By the time they arrived, the day was already hot enough to make anyone sweat if they stood outside too long. The church lot was filling quickly with cars, some familiar faces waving as the Dawsons pulled in. They parked in their usual spot not far from the entrance, a place they often chose for convenience. To any passerby, nothing seemed unusual as they stepped out of the SUV and walked inside, Bibles in hand. The doors closed, the locks clicked, and the car was left behind in the heat. What no one noticed was that Emily remained strapped in her seat, her tiny chest rising and falling steadily, her cheeks pink in the growing warmth. Inside, the service unfolded in the way it always did. The pastor delivered his sermon, the choir filled the air with hymns, and the congregation bowed their heads in prayer. The Dawsons sat among the rows, their expressions calm and composed, blending in with the solemn faces around them. To anyone who glanced their way, they looked like any other family seeking comfort and guidance in faith. No hint of worry or distraction betrayed them, nothing to suggest that their child was not safely in the care of a babysitter or tucked into the church nursery. Meanwhile, outside in the lot, the temperature rose quickly. The silver SUV shimmered under the glaring sun, the air inside thickening with heat. Emily shifted weakly, her small fists twitching as the warmth pressed in around her. The sound of distant traffic and the faint hum of cicadas were the only witnesses to her struggle. Minutes stretched into an hour, then longer, and the difference between the cool, dim sanctuary and the blistering car became a silent divide between life and death. By the time the final hymn echoed inside the church, the tragedy had already taken shape. No one yet knew. The congregation prepared to step outside, shaking hands, sharing smiles, and preparing to go about their peaceful afternoons. Behind the locked doors of the SUV, however, an irreversible event had already unfolded, hidden in plain sight among rows of cars that looked as ordinary as any other Sunday. The service ended just as the sun reached its fiercest height. The congregation spilled out of the wooden doors of St. Mark's, exchanging handshakes and pleasantries, their voices blending with the ringing of the church bells that marked the closing of another Sunday gathering. Families walked to their cars, children ran ahead with bursts of energy, and the air smelled faintly of cut grass and hot asphalt. At first, everything appeared ordinary. The Dawsons were among the last to leave, standing near the entrance, speaking briefly with fellow parishioners before beginning the slow walk back to their vehicle. No one around them could have guessed that their car held a devastating secret that was moments from being uncovered. It began with something small, barely noticeable. A young boy running through the lot paused beside the Dawsons' SUV. He peered through the tinted glass, squinting against the glare of the sun. At first, he thought he saw nothing unusual, but then the faint outline of movement caught his eye. Curious, he leaned closer, shading his face with his hand, and that was when he saw her. A tiny form strapped into a car seat, head lolling to the side, skin flushed. The boy backed away quickly, tugging at his mother's hand with urgent whispers. She dismissed him at first, assuming it was nothing, but when she looked for herself, her expression shifted from mild annoyance to absolute horror. Shouts echoed across the lot as the alarm spread. Several adults rushed toward the SUV, pulling at the handles, banging on the windows, but the doors were locked. Inside, Emily remained motionless, her once rosy cheeks now frighteningly pale beneath the flush of heat. A man sprinted to his own car for a tire iron, smashing it desperately against the glass. The sound of shattering windows rang out as bystanders reached inside, fumbling with seatbelts, their frantic movements fueled by disbelief and panic. The child was finally pulled free and laid across the hot asphalt while someone attempted chest compressions. A woman fell to her knees, trying to breathe life into the still form, but each attempt was met with silence. Paramedics were called, and within minutes, the wail of sirens cut through the heavy summer air. The professionals took over, working feverishly, but the crowd's faces told the truth before the words were spoken. Hope drained from them as quickly as the color had drained from the baby's face. Matthew and Claire collapsed to the ground when they saw their daughter's body being carried away, their cries sharp and unrestrained, echoing over the stunned murmurs of the crowd. Some rushed to comfort them, others simply stood in stunned silence, unable to process how such a thing could happen. It seemed unimaginable that two parents could walk into a building filled with faith and fellowship, leaving their most precious possession behind to suffer alone. Whispers spread like wildfire across the lot, speculation rising with every hushed word. Was it an accident? A tragic mistake born of distraction? Or something darker that no one yet dared to say aloud? The town of Fairgrove, once so proud of its unity and sense of safety, now stood shaken to its core. What had begun as an ordinary Sunday had transformed in a matter of moments into a nightmare that would haunt every person who had been there to witness it. Detectives arrived at the church parking lot within an hour of the tragedy, their presence shifting the atmosphere from grief to suspicion. The first step was to gather information, to understand how such a thing could happen. They asked routine questions of the Dawsons, careful not to inflame their already emotional state. Both parents claimed they had simply forgotten their daughter was in the back seat, distracted by the rush to make it to the service on time. Their words trembled with sorrow, yet something about the explanation left a shadow of doubt. Officers made notes, recording the timeline of events, then turned their attention to the scene itself. The silver SUV, now cordoned off with yellow tape, became a silent witness to what had occurred. Inside, the car seat still sat buckled, a reminder of the hours the baby had spent trapped in sweltering heat. Detectives studied the condition of the vehicle, noting how it had been parked in direct sunlight, no shade, no windows cracked open. It struck them as unusual that such attentive parents, known for their careful behavior, would make an oversight so severe. They photographed the dashboard, checked the climate controls, and logged every detail that might help explain the chain of events. Attention soon turned to the couple's movements. Investigators reviewed security cameras positioned around the church lot. The grainy footage revealed the Dawsons stepping out of the vehicle calmly, carrying no diaper bag, no infant carrier, nothing that might suggest they had brought their baby with them. They closed the doors without hesitation, walked toward the church, and blended into the crowd. There was no moment of sudden realization, no frantic return to the car, nothing that aligned with the image of parents who had accidentally left their child behind. The detectives noted this with growing unease. Back at the Dawson home, a deeper investigation began. The house appeared well kept, decorated with family photos and religious symbols, but financial records told a different story. Bills stacked neatly on the kitchen counter revealed mounting debt. Letters from creditors hinted at the couple's struggles to maintain the lifestyle they projected to the community. In a locked drawer, detectives discovered life insurance policies, several of them, all recently taken out on baby Emily. Each policy had been filed within the last year, overlapping in a way that seemed deliberate rather than coincidental. The payouts, combined, amounted to a sum large enough to erase the couple's financial burdens entirely. Detectives also subpoenaed internet records, which revealed disturbing searches conducted in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Phrases like, "How hot does a car get in summer?" "Time it takes for baby to die in heat," and "life insurance payout child death" appeared in the Dawson computer's history. The evidence was chilling, casting doubt on the narrative of forgetfulness. What had been mourned as a tragic accident was beginning to look more like a calculated act. Word of these discoveries spread quietly through the police department before leaking into the community. Neighbors who had once spoken of the Dawsons with admiration now whispered about greed, betrayal, and deception. The case had shifted dramatically, and investigators knew they were no longer handling a tragic oversight, but something far more sinister. The question was no longer how the baby had been forgotten. It was why. Forensic experts pored over every inch of the Dawson SUV, searching for proof of intent. What they uncovered added a new layer of dread to the case. The vehicle's air conditioning had been used briefly before being turned off, creating a temporary burst of cool air inside the cabin. Investigators believed this was deliberate, designed to keep the baby calm long enough for her parents to walk away without her crying out and drawing attention. This detail, though small, struck the team as calculated, the kind of step one would not expect from a distracted mistake, but rather from someone executing a plan. Inside the Dawson home, digital devices revealed more unsettling evidence. Alongside the chilling internet searches, emails and encrypted messages were uncovered. They showed Matthew Dawson communicating with an unknown recipient about financial desperation, debt collectors, and the need for a clean start. Though the recipient's identity wasn't immediately clear, the tone of the conversations painted Matthew as a man burdened by money problems and looking for a way out. The insurance policies on his infant daughter, taken together with these messages, shifted suspicion directly onto him. Claire Dawson's role remained uncertain, but investigators probed deeper. Her phone data revealed late-night searches about child safety, including topics like risk of leaving baby in car accidentally. Unlike Matthew's searches, hers carried a tone of anxiety rather than calculation. This detail left investigators questioning whether she had been a full participant in what happened, or whether she was a bystander caught in her husband's scheme. Her visible grief on the day of the discovery had seemed genuine to many witnesses, but grief did not erase the fact that she had walked past the SUV without checking on her child. The investigation's findings began leaking into the community, fueling rumors and gossip. Once celebrated for their devotion to church and family, the Dawsons became the subject of hushed conversations in grocery store aisles and whispered judgments after Sunday services. Some neighbors insisted the couple had made a tragic mistake, unwilling to believe people they knew so well could commit such a crime. Others, armed with fragments of leaked information, saw the Dawsons as frauds who had worn a mask of righteousness while plotting something unthinkable. The town itself began to split into factions, torn between sympathy and condemnation. Prosecutors prepared their case carefully, piecing together the evidence like a puzzle. The timeline of events, the insurance policies, the financial records, and the digital trail all pointed toward premeditation. The narrative of accidental forgetfulness was crumbling under the weight of facts that suggested otherwise. Yet for all the damning evidence, one question lingered in every mind. Why? Why would two parents, admired and respected, trade their daughter's life for financial relief? The final pieces of evidence hinted at something even darker than debt and desperation. Among Matthew's emails were fragments of conversation that suggested a double life, references to someone he described as my escape and my future. Investigators had yet to confirm the identity of this mysterious figure, but the tone was unmistakable. It appeared that Matthew Dawson was not only weighed down by financial ruin, but also driven by a desire to abandon his current life altogether. That possibility cast new suspicion not only on his motives, but also on the true extent of his wife's involvement. What had begun as a case of negligence was unraveling into a story of betrayal, greed, and secrets buried beneath the polished image of a church-going family. And as investigators pulled each new thread, the facade of the Dawsons' perfect life collapsed further, revealing a far more sinister reality than anyone in Fairgrove could have imagined. Court proceedings drew crowds from across Fairgrove, with people lining the steps of the courthouse, eager for answers to the questions that had shaken their once peaceful community. Matthew and Claire Dawson, once admired for their poise and devotion, now appeared as broken figures under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. The case against them was presented meticulously. Prosecutors laid out the life insurance policies, the internet search history, the timeline of the day, and the forensic evidence from the SUV. Every detail painted a picture of intent, of two parents who had left their baby to die in the heat for financial gain. Yet, as the case unfolded, cracks in the narrative began to show. The prosecution portrayed them as a unified pair acting in concert, but the defense pushed back, suggesting the two had not been equally involved. It was Matthew who had purchased most of the policies, Matthew who had conducted the most disturbing searches, and Matthew whose emails hinted at a future beyond his family life. Claire, they argued, was guilty of negligence, but she had not plotted her daughter's death. The emotional weight of this distinction hung heavily over the courtroom as spectators debated whether she was a victim herself or simply too complicit to be excused. Then came the revelation that changed everything. Through subpoenas and digital forensics, investigators had finally uncovered the full identity of the mysterious recipient of Matthew's emails. She was a woman named Julia Harper, living 2 states away, someone Matthew had met at a business conference months earlier. Their relationship had escalated into an affair, and their exchanges revealed promises of a shared future once Matthew handled his problems. In cold, detached language, he had described his life in Fairgrove as a cage and hinted that freedom depended on his ability to secure money quickly. The life insurance payouts on baby Emily were the cornerstone of that escape plan. This twist shifted the public's perception sharply. What had first been understood as a desperate act by financially strained parents was now reframed as something more sinister, a father willing to sacrifice his child to fund a new life with his lover. Claire's defense gained traction, painting her as someone who had been manipulated, who had suspected but not fully known the depth of Matthew's plan until it was too late. Prosecutors countered by highlighting her silence, her decision not to intervene even when doubts crept into her mind. The jury was left to decide how much she knew and whether her inaction made her guilty. The verdicts reflected this complexity. Matthew was convicted of first-degree murder, his cold planning and secret affair sealing his fate. The judge's words were stern, calling his actions a betrayal of not only his family, but the very community that had trusted him. Claire, by contrast, was convicted of negligence and received a reduced sentence. She wept openly as the decision was read. Her grief now mingled with relief that the court had acknowledged a difference between her role and her husband's.